So on Sunday, Argentina held some elections, legislative elections for half of its lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, as well as an election for a third of their upper house, the Senate. The election was originally scheduled for October 24th, but was postponed due to the pandemic to this weekend. And the results, well, they dealt a blow to the ruling Peronists, who lost their Senate majority. So let's outline what's happened and what it means for one of South America's biggest countries. If you want to see more videos like this one, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, as well as checking out our sister channels, including TLDR EU, where we're today discussing Bulgaria's elections, which also happened last weekend. It's linked down below. So before we get into the results of this election, a bit of context, because Argentine politics are pretty unique. Argentina has seen nearly as many military coups as any other country in the world, with a staggering 12 attempted coups since 1930, 6 of which were successful. This essentially meant that throughout the 20th century, Argentina swung between democracy and military rule, and only truly became a democracy in 1983, with the election of Raúl Alfonsín. Today, though, Argentinian politics have stabilized into a sort of two-party system, with the left-wing Frente de Todos coalition on one side, and the more right-leaning Juntos por el Cambio coalition on the other. Together, these two coalitions won 89% of the vote in the last general election held in 2019, which is quite something, given that historically, Argentinian politics has been wildly fragmented. The only real constant in Argentinian politics, though, has been Peronism, a political ideology inspired by the Argentinian leader Juan Perón, who was the leader of the Justicialist Party and the president of Argentina from 1946 to 1955. Perón was immensely popular with the Argentine working class, but was ousted and then exiled in a military coup in 1955. Perón then returned in 1973, once Argentina returned to democracy, and he was then re-elected as president, before dying just a year later in 1974. Juan Perón was then succeeded by his third wife, Isabel Perón, who was, yep, you guessed it, ousted by yet another military coup in 1976. Nonetheless, Peronism and its vehicle, the Justicialist Party, have remained a powerful force in Argentina. The Justicialist Party, or the coalition led by them, have been in power for 24 of the 38 years since 1983, when Argentina apparently became a democracy for good. So, what actually is Peronism? Well, it's sort of a vague blend of Argentine nationalism and labourism. But over the years, Peronists have swerved between radically opposed policies, making Peronism hard to define in terms of left and right. Regardless, in 2003, the Peronist Justicialist Party actually split over a disagreement between the more economically right-wing faction, led by Carlos Menem, and the more economically left-wing faction, led by Nestor Kirchner. And as such, since 2003, every presidential election has had at least 2 so-called Peronist candidates. You get the point. Peronism isn't a coherent political ideology, but this hasn't stopped Peronists from winning elections. They won every presidential election until 2015, when falling global food prices crippled Argentina's export-heavy economy, and Peronist candidate Daniel Scioli was narrowly beaten by Mauricio Macri, leader of the centre-right Cambianos. Once in power, Macri moved the peso from a fixed exchange rate to a floating one, reduced subsidies to try and bring down the government deficit, and opened Argentina's economy up to international capital markets. Initially, Macri's plan worked well, as he liberalised Argentina's economy, foreign investment went up, consumer prices fell, and GDP grew. Things were looking good for Macri, and it looked like Argentina was finally becoming a modern economy. Unfortunately for both Macri and Argentina, though, in 2018 things took a turn. In December 2017, when Macri pressured the central bank into loosening its inflation target from 12 to 15% and cutting interest rates, investors got spooked and the peso fell in value. Inflation then kicked in, Macri's government ran out of foreign currency reserves, and the peso continued to fall. In 2018 alone, the peso lost over half of its value against the dollar, and interest rates skyrocketed to 60%. The IMF then had to loan Argentina $50 billion in emergency loans. Now, usually, a high interest rate means lower inflation, but inflation was high too, at 54% in 2018, before falling to 42% in 2019. Unsurprisingly, Macri was punished for his economic mismanagement in 2019, when he was soundly beaten by Peronist and Justicialist Party presidential candidate Alberto Fernandez. Unfortunately for Argentinians though, Fernandez and the Peronists haven't done all that much better. Inflation was at 36% in 2020, and is expected to be above 50% in 2021. Things also weren't helped by Argentina's COVID lockdown, one of the strictest in the world, which forced a 10% contraction in GDP without actually even stemming the pandemic. Anyway, unsurprisingly, Fernandez's approval ratings have fallen from about 60% when he took office to just 30% today. And last Sunday, he faced the electorate for the first time since his election. There were legislative elections for half of Argentina's lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, and a third of its upper house, the Senate. Prior to the election, Frente de Todos, the coalition led by Fernandez, had a majority of 41 of the 72 seats in the Senate, but a minority of 120 of the 257 seats in the Chamber of Deputies, meaning that they still needed the support of minor parties to pass legislation. The midterms made things a fair bit worse for the Peronists though, as they lost a handful of Senate seats, meaning that they've now got a slight minority in the Senate too. And this marks the first time in 40 years that the Peronists have failed to hold a majority in the Senate. You get the point then. It's pretty bad news for the incumbent Peronists, and it's possible that electoral blowback for economic mismanagement may finally force Peronists and Argentine politicians more generally to take their economic duties more seriously. But this is in no way guaranteed. Argentina has been in economic chaos for most of its modern history, and Argentine politicians, Peronists or not, have historically favoured economically illiterate but immediately popular policies. These have typically required lots of inflation fueling money spending, which is why inflation has stayed so reliably above 10% for the last 20 years. For context, the UK is currently freaking out about the prospect of 4% inflation. So you can see that Argentina's economy has basically followed a pattern of extreme boom and bust, oscillating manically between periods of impressive growth and steep recession. Since 1956, Argentina has posted negative annual GDP growth a staggering 24 times, which basically means that in 24 out of the last 66 years, Argentina's economy has been in recession. For context, the UK has been in recession for just 8 of those years, and Chile, Argentina's neighbour, for just 12. And in the same period, Argentina has required a staggering 21 IMF loans, second only to Pakistan with 22, including a massive $50 billion loan in 2018, the IMF's largest loan ever. The point is that Argentina's economy has been struggling for nearly 70 years, which is why solving their current economic woes will require some very tough decisions, which so far Argentine politicians have been too reluctant to make. Anyway, what do you think? Will the results of these elections force the Peronists to confront Argentina's economic woes, or will they just carry on doing what they've always done? Comment your thoughts down below. Also down below, you'll find links to all of our other channels, as well as the Bulgarian election video I mentioned earlier. So subscribe to this channel and the others for updates on topics like this, and hit the bell to be notified every time we post. A special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description.